Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of CGY Conversations with the new series that we're running from the Centre for Global Youth. This is our last installment for 2020, but we'll be back again in January with some more exciting interviews. For this end of term special, we're joined by Dr. Golo Henseke, who is an economist at UCL Institute of Education. Golo has done a lot of work on graduate outcomes in the labour market, and the long-term impact of job quality and private schooling. Golo is here to talk to us today about his new research project, which has been funded by the ESRC and which started last month. Welcome, Golo. Tell us about this new project. What is the project about, and what are you hoping to achieve?
Thanks, Ava. Thank you for having me. It's great. Nice have a nice chat with you about this project. So what we hope to achieve is, of course, to better understand the situation in which young people find themselves and how they're coping with the pandemic at the moment and the potential recovery. So what we want to do...
So it's very COVID impact focused.
It's purely COVID impact focused. We want to know how have young people experienced the pandemic, what impact has it had on their lives, their mental well-being, and their future plans. And we want to track basically how last year or this year has been, and then going forward, how is the recovery playing out for young people? Is the recovery actually the economic recovery that we're hopeful and the vaccines become available? Is that trickling down to individuals? Is it trickling down to young people?
So will you be doing it then at 2 time points? You'll be doing tracking the information, or will you just be doing
it? So what the plan is to collect new data from young people. First, we launch a survey that will in quarterly intervals ask young people how they what their situation is and what things have changed. So how have they experienced education? How is the situation on the labor market? How is their mental health? And how do young people think about their future? We also are going out to look at labor market stakeholders and want to ask on the ground what initiatives there are and the experiences these initiatives have made to support young people's career readiness and employability, how effective this is during this time when there are no job vacancies. Are there good examples that maybe other places can learn from? And we also plan on interviewing a small number of young people in those geographies and ask young people how their interaction with these employment support services has played out, and what their hopes are going forward.
Okay, so are you looking at other countries as well as the UK?
Yes, actually we do. We have collaborators in Germany, in Ireland, and Canada, and I think that's really nice. The really nice aspect of this project, not to just look at what the situation is in the UK, but try to look elsewhere what has happened. And this already had a really good conversation on Monday with our collaborators, and how different the pandemic has hit economies and young people, like in Ireland or Canada, right? The unemployment rate of young people has gone up through the roof. Both countries, like I think in Ireland is 1 in 5 now, and in Canada at its peak was almost 40% of young people unemployed. It's come down by now. Whereas in Germany, it's like minuscule, 6% unchanged from pre-COVID levels, and in the UK kind of in between. Things have gotten worse, but not as much as we might have feared back in April. So that's really, really interesting to have like this international perspective on it, to first of all compare the UK trends against others, and also to see actually what is it that was different across these countries, to maybe learn as well, learn what the UK could do, or what the UK government could do to mitigate the impact of the pandemic for young people and their circumstances.
Well, what's fascinating is when you were talking about there is the fact that this international differences seem to mirror what happened after the 2008 economic crash, wherein unemployment in Ireland skyrocketed. In Germany, it stayed pretty stable. So do you have any indication yet, it's very early days, as to what are the differences of what is Germany doing that's managing to keep young people in jobs?
Yeah, no answer yet to that, but maybe at the end. I mean, of course, we could speculate in what we could speculate. It might have to do with the policies countries adopted. What's different this time in the UK is that there's been a furlough scheme, which wasn't there before. So that helped to keep people in work, definitely. What has happened in the UK is that the outflow out of unemployment has slowed down. I think you would see the same in Germany. But in both countries, what I would still expect to see is like a reduction in job skills development. Like if you're on furlough or or you're still not in work or do work less hours, and that might have implications on how much actually you can learn on the job and how much training there is provided on the job. And this kind of things might have still longer term consequences. Whereas in Ireland, I think the policy response was more to increase the generosity of the unemployment insurance system so that the payouts were higher. People could cope with the situation, therefore better out of work monetarily. What is interesting as well is that despite all these different economic or employment trajectories, that mental health has really suffered, especially at the beginning in April, May, of young people were the worst affected mental health across all those countries. But the situation has improved. And also the groups that were affected were kind of not always as intuitive as one would have expected, maybe. Like it seems that these inequalities between groups, and between countries, that's something that we really want to focus on in this project, and try to look a little bit as well how have these inequalities between groups, by ethnicity, education status, gender, but also across regions, changed and intersected with COVID, with the pandemic, and then its recovery.
So you'll be collecting data in all 4 countries, is that correct? As part of the
not as part of the project, but we'll draw on data that is available. So the most data collection is going to happen in the UK. Then we have a little bit going on in Germany, and in the other countries we rely on secondary data.
Okay. So it is much more using secondary data for some of it, and primarily within the UK.
Yeah.
When you're kind of thinking about this project, how would you tell a lay person who isn't so au fait with youth employment and skills, why is it so important for us to be looking at conducting research on youth economic activity right now and on their health outcomes?
I guess the biggest concern when I started to think about this was the potential scarring effect. So that if people graduate into a recession, they usually takes a really, really long time to recover that lost income at the beginning. So the idea is that we want to look in this project at potential mechanisms to ameliorate the scarring effect. So what could help to get young people back into work, to develop skills they need to succeed in the labor market? What jobs are needed what jobs do we need to support young people and permit them to enter or give them a foot in the labor market, really. So I think it's about limiting the long-term consequences of COVID on young people's careers and well-being. That's basically it.
So is the pathway within this, or is it a separate outcome where you've got youth, let's say, unemployment or de-skilling, and that has an impact on their health outcomes? or is it that you're interested in them both separately?
That's very interesting. With the mental health thing, that's of course the health is. I mean, it's related to employment in multiple ways, or the interaction between mental health and the economic status is, of course, both ways, because there's a feedback loop from one to the other, and vice versa. Mental health suffers with economic insecurity, and if the labor market doesn't look great and you don't quite know what to do, that does have a consequence on young people's mental health. It was already bad in the UK specifically before COVID, and we know it's got worse, especially in the first few months of the back in April, with the first lockdown has recovered, but some groups still struggle on. So I think it's the mix of economic uncertainty that impacts mental health, and mental health itself also limits or can, I mean, especially if it's real bad, can limit people's capabilities of making, of finding, having the energy to find work, and get and basically plan for their future. I think there's these both way back and forth relationship, mental health and well-being, mental health and employment.
We know that unemployment has long-term scarring effects for young people on their income and their other sorts of outcome and some of the other economic outputs. Does it also have a long-term effect on their mental health?
Oh, that's good. I don't actually know whether we have a long-term effect on mental health. Usually you see a recovery in mental health fairly quickly with changing life circumstances. So if people improve or get onto a better job, you would expect also change or you might see a change in mental health that subsequently. The long term, you might, but then as a result of it, you might expect to see if graduates struggle, for example, to get into a graduate job in the start of the career, and as a consequence have to deal with more uncertainties around the labor market and career transition. That might have a mental health consequence over a longer period. At least in the moment, it's not a happy choice, and that might make it harder for the individual also to then going forward.
Be interesting to look at for the long term, to see if there are long-term vulnerabilities. That's what it might mean, that if you've had depression once, it might then recur as a result of that, or making
that definitely
more aware of the fragility of your position, which could undermine your mental health longer term. But there's another long-term project for you. Dear ESRC, please give us more money to look in the longer term.
Exactly.
So one of the other indicators that you're looking at is youth optimism about the future. Now, this is a topic I'm particularly interested in, but it's not necessarily familiar to others. So why is this an important thing for us to be looking at?
So I think there are different things about. First, we need to think about what is it actually that future optimism is. And we have actually in the team struggled a little bit or had a discussion around this. It could be like an attitude kind of thing, a belief that an individual is just optimistic about the future, just give whatever circumstances they're optimistic. Or is it something more like an expectation that people think about? Okay, what's the chance that that I have a job after graduating, or what's the chance that I lose my job in the next 12 months? Something like that. It could be interpreted as future optimism or pessimism, or is it more something related to mental health? If we look at those mental health survey questions, they often involve like an element about how worried or anxious you are about your future as kind of an indicator of your well-being. So it's really interesting to think about this different different ways, and what is it actually future optimism? In our idea is for now that it's kind of it's more that this attitude and belief thing that we want to focus on, so that it's in every resource that people can draw on for their using in their future in their planning, and basically as an indicator of agency and how they manage and navigate the situation and cope with it.
Okay, it's really interesting, and I can't wait to see the data on that, on how young people are feeling about the future, or how we navigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be really good. We hope to get some cross country data on that. So that would be really interesting. So how depending on the kind of question though, and as I said, we have a little bit this disagreement on what is actually that is important, and because we both only have a very small survey, like we can only ask for like 10 minutes, that's our survey length, and the kind of question that you can include in that is very limited. And if we think of future optimism as something more like an ability, like belief or attitude, we wouldn't expect necessarily that changes with COVID. So somebody who is an optimist by trade will not necessarily become less optimistic about their future just because of COVID. If it's an expectation, maybe there's more COVID going on. If you ask a graduate or if you ask a student now, what do they believe your chances are to get a good job and to 1 to 2, 3 years after graduation, you would probably see something. If it's a mental health aspect, how worried are you about your future? I think that would be stuff that has a COVID, where you might see a COVID effect. If it's more about you as an individual, how do you see your future long term? I think, and so what I've seen so far is that this attitude belief things might actually be fairly robust through the circumstances. People make up their beliefs and attitudes more about longer term thinking than like the COVID effect. Or maybe rightfully so. Maybe people are actually judging this as the COVID as kind of a short-term blip in their life overall.
That's what I found in young people's attitudes toward the Brexit. You know, they were initially quite worried, then they absorbed the shock, and then just got back to, you know, planning in the way that they normally would. So it was not something that, in the interviews that I undertook, had fundamentally changed their life plans in that way. It was more a hurdle that they could overcome. So maybe COVID is viewed the same thing, partly because, you know, futures are malleable at that age. Basically, what age are you looking at? Which age range?
So young people 16 to 25.
Okay. So it'll incorporate some young graduates, but not the longer term graduate.
Yeah, not the longer term. It's just right after. I might, for this project is 16 to 25. We wanted to look at the transition into post-18 education. So how has that changed? I haven't talked about that much, but that's one of the transitions we want to look at, and then the graduating into, and then upon graduation and movement into careers in the early 20s.
Okay. The challenging thing, of course, for moving into graduate careers is, it was my understanding that lots of young people don't move straight from university into graduate careers. They often take a little bit of while, gap years, muddling around, working in retail. So if you're talking about careers, even 25 might be quite early.
That's true. But from my knowledge, you still see differences between graduates very early on, like where they end up. It's often the first job is quite a good prediction of where things are heading in the future, because those that are starting off in a graduate career, they are on a professional trajectory that takes that just where then things line up basically. Whereas graduates who, I mean, it's not saying that it's all probabilistic, so it's nothing deterministic what I'm saying here, but it's in general, the picture is that if you start off in a graduate job as a graduate, you can build on that.
Yeah.
Somebody who doesn't start off in a graduate job and does take a little while to find their foothold in the labor market through maybe jobs that are not necessarily graduate at graduate level, for those it's harder also in the future, because they need to, in order to, or not they need to, but in order to catch up, it takes long, and they might get stuck in dead end jobs. So it's that's the risk.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you can already see very early on, and it's definitely graded by socioeconomic background and the type of university you attend, what kind of place or what kind of job you end up on after leaving university or college.
Okay, good to hear. I've been teaching my students the right things when I tell them about graduate employment. It's one of the things that
I mean, I don't want to make everyone to be like a corporate hog who just wants to get into that graduate training scheme, and there's no way else to achieve anything in life. That's definitely not what I want to say. But in general, is those people who do that kind of take that path, they're also the ones that end up having the money at the age 42 or something like that.
You're making me reflect on my own post-BA degree, going, yes,
Yep.
yes.
Absolutely.
I took the longer term trajectory by doing a lot of more education after that. So how then, Golo, does this project build on the work that you've done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I've done, as you said in the beginning, I've done some work on graduate jobs, and the transition from university to graduate jobs. In general, the uncertain future or the uncertain demand that graduates face in this expanding higher education systems, right? The higher education systems are expanding everywhere. The number of graduates is rising everywhere. University graduates, that is, going up. But at the same time, there are great uncertainties in the demand for what we usually would consider graduate jobs. So that's something I have looked at quite intensively, and I think that's where this project builds mostly on my interest from this look at the graduate jobs or graduate labor markets. Then from that I developed an interest in career readiness and employability, and the redistributional aspect of higher education expansion. So who's now, so what does it now take to get into a good paying job is very different to what it took like even 20 years ago to get into a paid job. And so you have to go through universities these days, at least in a lot of cases, as gatekeeping institutions to these top jobs. So that was like more the conceptual interest, conceptual relation to with this project, and that then intersected with the start claimant count numbers we saw in April, like when the first numbers came out and how much the uptick of universal credit was in the UK, and the kind of that interest then led to this project or grant application, and that then eventually got funded.
Okay, I think it seems really timely and really important to be doing right now. So you are collecting both quant and qual data. So how are you doing in these COVID times where we're not allowed to be in the same building as each other? How has this affected the kind of data collection you can do?
It has affected, of course, the interviews. The qualitative data collection has had a clear effect. We can only do them remotely, Zoom, such as this one. Rachel Wild is leading that work package, and she will do most of this she will do these interviews online through Zoom or Teams or whatever. So we have to do them online, basically. You have no, and this, it's challenging building the rapport with people who you might have not met before, just online. I mean, Rachel is excellent at her at this, so I'm sure she can do it, but it's a challenge nonetheless. For the quantitative part, it would have always been an online survey, and it's in somehow it's amazing. And usually this move to online surveys, it's hard, of course, to have the it's difficult to get the national representative with just this one mode, because of course the people who sit at a computer or with a phone and fill in surveys are kind of different than the general population. So it might be a bit tricky to get this national representative nature of a sample from it. There are ways to compensate it, but of course it's always tied to assumption.
The challenge in my experience is that, I mean, you're trying to get people who are deeply disengaged from the workforce, who are or who have the lowest skills, because they're not on the lists of survey companies and they are not participating in these surveys.
That's right. I think this usually what you see is that online surveys are more female and more professional in their makeup. Although it's with this proprietary access panel, I mean, that we draw on. So it's like an online panel that is looked after by the survey company and maintained and managed. They try to recruit, of course, people from all sorts of backgrounds into the panel. But yeah, if you're, there will be definitely blind spots. We have got a few questions in to really pick out in the survey, to pick out people who are at severe disadvantage. So we have we have an understanding of, for example, what's the proportion of people in this age group on precarious homes, who struggle with, who had money problems and might have even had to forego meals because of money issues, and who've been growing up in foster care. So we have kind of a few questions that really address severe social disadvantage, and we can see kind of what on those severe disadvantage, what we find on those groups with a severe disadvantage, are they actually showing up in the survey? Is kind of considered a litmus test whether we actually manage to also collect information from people who are usually hard to reach in survey research.
But also within 10 minutes. It's a lot of questions to ask within 10 minutes, but some really good ideas as to how to see if they are actually in the sample. And then if not, you can always try and find other ways that are qualitative to try to identify that gap. So all of this sounds amazing, Golo. When no pressure, because I know it's only early days, but when will we find out some of the findings?
The plan is February or March 2021, so first quarter of 2021, to have first findings from the survey and the qualitative interviews. Get first findings out. We do regular blogs, so they might pop up. A few might have popped up by then elsewhere outside, trying to get them onto the IOE blog, at the Lake Center blog. They will be all there. By then, hopefully we have like 1, 2, 3 blogs out there describing kind of what we want to do, what are the issues, and then starting from February, March, really adding our new evidence to the discussion.
Well, when is your survey already in the field, or is that coming in January?
It's coming at the end of January. We kind of had it planned initially to go into the field earlier, but well, things just take their time.
Yes.
More and off, and usually more than you think initially.
The joys of data collection, but soon you'll have some fresh
Yeah,
data.
it's really nice. Actually, it's really nice, and also it gives some more time to think about, for example, the future optimism question. What is it actually that we really want to know about young people, and also to think a little bit more about the nice thing with the 6 waves of survey that we actually get, because we ask a survey every 3 months, is that we can change questions as well. Although it's just 10 minutes, in the end, it's 60 minutes of question time that we've got, that we can change questions, responding to the changing context. Who knows, maybe these vaccines will roll out eventually, or have rolled out and reach a wider population. Maybe by summer next year, we will all back to normal, back to business, and we can track that with a survey in our ongoing qualitative field work. Or maybe things just got worse because of Brexit, and God knows what happens. So we at least be prepared for eventualities and can react to them.
Okay, that's incredible. Well, I'm looking forward to finding out the findings when they become available, and maybe you'll come back and talk to us again when you have some of the findings and let us know what they are.
That would be great.
For the moment, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk to me at the end of term when we are all exhausted and when we've all been so busy. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks very much.